Philip Hamilton, and I'm here with Father Coleman today. Today is April 20th, 2018, and we're going to dwell in some of Father Coleman's past. One of his associates, Father McDonald, and we'll also touch on some civil rights history as well, with the work with Cesar Chavez. And we'll just start off, first question is, how did you come to know Father McDonald? What year and what circumstances?
1939, September, I went to seminary. He was already there for about 3 years. So he was a fourth high student, I was a first year student. And he was well known for his academic ability. He was a summa cum laude, eventually. And he was always known as a brilliant guy. So, Father Mac,
In how many languages was it that he knew?
Oh, that's hard to know. I mean, when you say somebody speaks a language, that's kind of relative, And he was certainly eventually. But you mean in those days? In those days?
Yeah, because, languages of varying degrees.
Oh, in those days, he was learning a lot of Latin and Greek in seminary, for years. But he taught himself Spanish a little later on, And, I think he just got books and learned it,
Considering that California is the only state in the entire union that required a state constitution in both English and Spanish, I think it's the who of him to learn Espanol as well. Yeah.
Well, he saw the need of it early on because he figured he needed it for his ministry,
Mm-hmm.
But, all the immigrants that were coming in, the braceros too, coming in in droves to work the fields, bracero program. Yeah. But he was conversant and probably knew a lot of Portuguese, a lot of French, and later on, looking way ahead, he became fluent in Chinese and Japanese,
Wow.
for his work. Yeah.
That is
That's an
impressive.
answer to your question, how many languages he knew. He was really good at languages.
And how long did it take him to learn Chinese and Japanese?
Well, I'd say he spent about a year on each, and he became very good in the year. That's really fast to learn those languages. Yeah.
Especially Chinese when there's over 2,000 characters you have to learn compared to.
Well, I
26.
wouldn't say he learned all the writing, but
Mm.
he could carry on a little conversation which is kind of monumental,
Hmm.
in Japanese and Chinese. He learned Japanese because he found when he went to Brazil in 1960, he found a couple 100,000 Japanese people there. A lot of them were Christian, and so he wanted to work with them. So he got permission from the bishop to go to Japan for a year. And later on after that, around 70, he was appointed to a parish in San Francisco that had a lot of Chinese. So once again, he went to the Far East and he learned for a year. He took up intensive study of Chinese. Anyhow, that's getting ahead of the story, though.
Yeah, that's okay.
This is, you asked originally about when I first knew him was in high school, Yeah.
And now that we're backtracking again, so he learned Spanish, and he viewed it as imperative to speak with the Spanish-speaking population. And from what you saw and from what he saw back then, how were farmers at the time, like in California, how were their livelihoods, and did you all see, like, were they treated as like a different class compared to the rest of the Americans, like at that time?
let's say in the minor seminary time, for me, from 39 till 44, and for him from like 1936 to, 41, something like that. We were pretty secluded, the seminary was, separate from the general flow of life, so you, except in the summer vacation, you wouldn't see much of the problem from the agricultural workers. Although probably Father McDonald had his eye open to more than we did, about it, because he seemed always interested in agricultural workers. I remember when we got to the major seminary, he was interested in the principles of Monsignor Lagudi. Every man needs space, land, water, air. So
The castle to live in. Yeah.
he was all for promoting small farms for everybody. Yeah.
And yeah, bringing the term like a home. Well, even though it's not physically a castle, but figuratively as a castle, because families want a place to call their own. And was there a specific event, or was there a specific individual that compelled him to be more interested in farmer workers that you can recall?
I would say as a product of the Depression, he grew up in the Depression from like when he was 5 to 15. He probably got very interested in helping the poor, in general, and farm workers specifically, because they weren't paid very well. And I think the Bracero program started, I guess, around 47, something like that. I'm not sure exactly when. Workers were brought up here for half a year without family, and then that was a bad system. He was against that system, even though he worked with the Braceros after he was ordained,
And what were some of the negative aspects of the system that
Well,
you remember?
the low pay, one thing, low conditions for living, they had a rustic dorm, or living quarters.
And how many folks would live in a single dorm?
Oh, I don't know, I didn't have too much experience seeing the dorms. I saw a couple of dorms, like you'd have 40 guys in a little dorm, But they were here without their wives and children. That's not a very good idea. And, the availability of services out in the field, like getting water or bathroom facilities, and everything was kind of rustic, They weren't very well treated. Some owners did treat the Braceros with better housing and better working conditions, But by and large, I think the Braceros had a pretty rough time,
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because to mark the 25th anniversary of Cesar Chavez's passing, there was actually a march in Salinas on April 8th, and in present day they're calling for a lot of things that you just mentioned, proper hydration, proper breaks, and because when you're working in arid climates like you have in California, you definitely need to have enough hydration to get through the day. And things have gotten better through Chavez's work, but there's still improvements to be made at this time.
So what your question is?
Well, so now I'll ask you about Chavez. Do you recall when the first time Father McDonald actually met Cesar Chavez?
Yeah, I put it, was between 50 and 60, but I'm not sure exactly.
Mhm.
Maybe, I guess 1955, around in there. I think Chavez was about 18 when he picked him out as a leader, you know. He was living in a barrio they call Sal Si Puedes, get out if you can, that's what the name of the place was. In East San Jose, around Cameron and Jackson Street. And this was after Father McDonald was ordained. And he was ordained about 3 years. And he started the Spanish mission band. 4 or 5 priests were as a team to work among the Spanish-speaking of 13, well, the Diocese of San Francisco had 13 counties, but about 4 or 5 counties had a large Mexican population, so that Spanish mission band was going to work among them. So, and he assigned himself to Santa Clara County. They got permission from the Archbishop they wouldn't have to work with specific parishes, but to work at whole areas. Yes. They zeroed in on the Bracero camps, you know, they worked. Anyhow, he saw Chavez as a future leader, and so he taught him. He taught him social justice. Chavez says that in his book, Welga, I told you.
Yes.
He said, I remember I made note of the page 66. He said, the beginning of my learning about social justice was with Father McDonald. Well, the beginning of my education in social justice was with Father Donald McDonald, East San Jose. And he said that. You know.
Wow.
That's a pretty good testimony.
Of what compelled him into the movement?
Pardon?
Yeah, of what compelled him into the movement?
Yeah,
Supporting
yeah,
farmers' rights.
I think that might have, of course, he had been a field worker as a kid, you know, I don't know where it was, in New Mexico, Arizona, I forget. And so he knew about the tough conditions, you know.
I believe it's Arizona since he had family out there.
I'm not sure, yeah. So,
And I know that Chavez actually served in the Navy, and this was in 1946. He was there for I think it was a year or 2.
oh,
But,
was it that far back, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
But
So maybe Father might have met him in the early 50s, you know.
yeah.
As I know, Father Mac went to East San Jose in 1950. So, might have met him in the early 50s. He'd be about 18 then, you know. So, well, if he was in the Navy in 46, he'd have to be 17 then.
Yeah.
At least.
He served in the Pacific Front,
Okay.
and
I don't know too much about his Navy career, you know. But the thing I remember most about the whole situation was that building. The building that they want to name as a national, is it relevant to talk to you about this now?
yeah, yeah.
The building was originally St. Martin's Church over by O'Connor Hospital in San Jose. That'd be like, I guess, West San Jose, near Stevens Creek and the freeway, 17, around there. Anyhow, when they were going to build a new church out there, Father McDonald bought the old church, the little building, for $1,000. I don't know where he got the $1,000, but he bought it. And he had it moved by Kelly Brothers, I believe, from there out to East San Jose. And he built a foundation for like $6,000. And he put that little building there in Camera, 2121 Camera. I lived there for a while. In that parish later from 1661, around there. And I was helping Father in the early 50s there, and went to some camps with him, not too many. and helped around the church there on my vacation. Anyhow, that building, the newspaper said it was built in '53 by some of the parishioners. That's not true. That building was already 40 or 50 years old.